dream I've always believed in is no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, either in spite of nor because of.
Where you were born, who your parents are,
should not determine where you end up.
A real place where advantage is based on
merit. If you've got the talent, if you've got
the hard work that matter.
I want this to be a true
meritocracy. The thing that my parents came here to
pursue the American dream. And if that is important to you,
then this is the change we need if we are to make Britain the great
meritocracy. Isn't that a beautiful word? Meritocracy. Based on
merit, and to go just as far as their dreams and hard work will take them.
May the odds be ever in your favor.
Do we live in a meritocracy? Should we live in one? Well, the answers to both of those questions depend on who you ask, and they're questions that have been popping up more and more lately as talk of merit and DEI and oligarchy and wealth inequality have been all over the news. But what even is meritocracy? Most of the time, it seems to be equated with the American dream, this idea that as long as you work hard and make good choices, you can be successful in life. It's leveling the playing field so we can all get a fair shot. It's equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. When choosing who gets a job, it's focusing on how qualified the candidate is, rather than other considerations like who they know, or what they look like, or where they're from. And on the surface, I think most of us agree that these are probably good things, right? Success should be correlated with hard work, and we should make sure that we're hiring the best candidates. But what we can't agree on is whether or not that actually is happening. Some people argue that hard work isn't being rewarded, that the rich have an unfair advantage, and that there are systemic biases that need to be accounted for when leveling the playing field. Others argue that the playing field was already level, and trying to counteract so-called systemic bias with things like DEI actually just makes things more unfair. Studies seem to show that young people are much more skeptical of the even playing field than older people. And the same is true with education. The more educated you are, the more skeptical you become of the idea that we live in a meritocracy. Another study seems to corroborate these results, suggesting that older people are more likely to attribute success to hard work and personal sacrifices, while younger generations say success is less about how hard you work, and instead it comes down to who you know. But even though there's pretty big differences across generations, another study says Americans believed just as strongly that the US was meritocratic in 2010 as they did in 1987. Essentially, our overall belief in meritocracy didn't change between 1987 and 2010. We mostly attribute success to meritocratic factors, but we do also acknowledge that there are some non-merit factors that influence how successful someone is. But what did change is which non-merit factors we think matter. In 1987, they thought success could be affected by racial, gender, and religious discrimination. But in 2010, they thought those features had less of a role in success than family wealth, parental education, social ties, and political connections did. But the other conclusions in this paper actually go completely counter to what those other surveys that I talked about earlier concluded. So the other surveys correlated age with meritocratic beliefs. The younger you are, the more skeptical you are that we live in a meritocracy. But this study finds that both in 2010 and 1987, older respondents are especially likely to believe in the importance of family and friends or discrimination for getting ahead, leading to a weaker overall belief in meritocracy. The older respondents are, the less likely they are to be true believers. And that's not the only inconsistency either. Remember how I said that between 1987 and 2010, we had stayed pretty stable in our general meritocratic beliefs? Well, a Pew survey from 2020 showed that there actually has been a shift since then. So in 2014, 51% of respondents believed that success came from advantages in life, while 38% believed it came from working hard. But in 2020, a huge 65% were team advantage, while only 33% were team hard work. And while Republicans have consistently leaned more hard work than advantage, even they have slowly been moving more and more towards the advantage side of things since 2018. It seems like meritocratic beliefs kind of peaked in 2017, 2018, which I think is kind of odd. Let me know in the comments what you think might have caused that, because I have no idea. But what's most interesting about this survey in particular is that the participants weren't just asked about what makes a person successful. They were also asked about what makes a person unsuccessful. And while most Americans are starting to believe that the rich are rich because of their advantages rather than their work ethic, they also believe that poor people are poor because of their disadvantages rather than their work ethic. The interesting thing about this, though, is that it shows just how inconsistent people are about their meritocratic beliefs. Like, if you think that people get rich because they work hard, then you should also think that people are poor because they didn't work hard, right? And if you think that luck and advantage explain success, then you should think the same thing about failure. But that's not what happens. When people are asked why rich people are rich, 65% say that it's because they had more advantages, where only 33% say that it's because they worked harder. But when it comes to why poor people are poor, 71% say that it's because they faced more obstacles in life, while just 26% blame it on a lack of hard work. This gap is especially pronounced among Republicans, where 53% of them believe success comes from hard work, but only 42% of them believe that failure comes from a lack of hard work. A majority of Republicans believe in meritocracy when it comes to success, but that same majority does not believe in meritocracy when it comes to failure. If you win, that means you must have worked hard. But if you lose, it's probably just due to things outside your control. So, what's the deal? We all seem pretty conflicted about meritocracy across age and time period. And on top of that, our beliefs are undergoing unprecedented change. We used to be super solid about meritocracy, but now, not so much. But why? Well, a big part of the messiness of measuring meritocracy comes from an issue of definition. What does meritocracy mean? Surprisingly, lots of people talk about meritocracy without actually defining it. And as philosophy professor Thomas Mulligan puts it, the public debate tends to be convoluted because commentators often fail to make clear what they mean by meritocracy. And when you don't know what meritocracy means, you can hardly get away with drawing conclusions about it.
How meritocratic existing liberal societies already are is a difficult issue to address empirically, in part because we don't have a clear understanding of what meritocracy means, so we don't have a proper measuring rod against which to gauge social realities, saying how far they do or do not conform to meritocratic criteria.
There's the question of whether you're talking about it in terms of government, as in the country should be run as a meritocracy, or in terms of justice, as in people should get what they deserve, positive or negative. There's also a chicken and egg question too, like, does meritocracy mean you're successful so you must have worked hard? Or does it mean you've worked hard so you deserve to be successful? As similar as those sentences sound, they're not exactly equivalent. Part of the reason it's so hard to decide on a definition is because the term meritocracy actually A, isn't that old, and B, started out as satire. Well, sort of. Because just to add to the confusion, we also can't always agree on who exactly used the term first. Michael Young is widely regarded as having coined the term meritocracy in his satirical 1958 book, The Rise of the Meritocracy. However, the term was in fact used 2 years earlier by Alan Fox in his essay, Class and Equality. So the first actual use of the term wasn't actually satirical, but it's not like Fox was using it positively. In fact, he was pretty scathing. His essay was published in a journal called Socialist Commentary, and the essay itself was a careful sociological summary of the policies, social apparatuses, and ideologies that cause stratification. Like, for example, low incomes having made it impossible for workers to break out of the vicious circle which cramped their lives. For Fox, meritocracy is a term of abuse. But then along came Michael Young and his playful dystopian social satire, The Rise of Meritocracy. The book does paint meritocracy as absurd and damaging to society, but it wasn't quite as radical as Fox's original work. So immediately after the word meritocracy is coined, it gets sort of politically neutered. And then, over the following decades, the term gets even more watered down, losing its original satirical meaning altogether. And eventually it gets used by the very people Alan Fox was warning us against, to implement the very policies he was criticizing. No wonder our beliefs about meritocracy are so hard to pin down. The term itself had done a complete 180 by the time it could legally run for president. But, on the other hand, meritocracy as a concept, as an idea, as vibes, has been around basically forever. We've always believed that hard work and rewards go hand in hand. And that makes sense, right? It's something we experience on a small scale all the time. As one researcher explained,
from an early age, each of us is repeatedly exposed to an easily perceivable fact, that the intensity of an effect often stands in a linear relation to the intensity of its cause. Roughly, more cause equals more effect. The harder it rains, the wetter you get. The harder you kick a ball, the faster it moves. We can just see, or so it seems to us, the links between effort and success.
So because this idea is sort of baked into our monkey brains, it shows up all over the place in history. The most famous realization of the Eastern meritocratic tradition was the imperial examinations, which began in China during the Sui dynasty. Until that point, entry into the state bureaucracy was mainly controlled via nepotism and aristocratic influence. The imperial examinations replaced, to some extent, that route to power with a single, impartial, rigorous examination, which was open to the public. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because I've actually talked about these exams before, in my plagiarism video. So, not to get ahead of myself, but this supposedly meritocratic system of examinations didn't actually work as intended and actually ended up with a lot of corruption, but again, we'll get to that. The idea of hard work leading to a better life is also present in the original version of Snakes and Ladders, or Chutes and Ladders for my fellow Americans, which is actually super old. Now, I've seen conflicting dates for when it was first invented. Some say it was the 2nd century BC, while others say it was the 13th century AD, which big gap there, guys. But in either case, it's been around for a long time. As Joe Littler explains,
the earliest examples known are Hindu, Jain, and Islamic versions from India, Nepal, and Tibet, where they were developed as religious instruction games. The pavilion at the top represents the heavens, where the liberated beings live together. There is no supreme creator god. Jains, like Buddhists and Hindus, believe in a cycle of birth and rebirth, influenced by the effects of good and bad deeds and attitudes. The goal is for people to move past the many snakes, symbolizing bad behavior, and to arrive through good behavior at the pavilion at the top.
But like with all things, eventually the British came and stole it.
In later 19th century versions, British imperialism in India resulted in the game being translated into a game of Christian capitalist moral instruction. Robbery leads down a snake to a beating. Strike while the iron is hot results in forging ahead. And punctuality leads up a ladder to opulence. By this stage, opulence is good. The goal of the game is to reach the Scroll of Fame, a zone featuring a list of people well known for their wealth, hard work, genius, and virtue, including nurse Florence Nightingale, scientist Isaac Newton, and banker philanthropist George Peabody. The game's goal is no longer spiritual enlightenment, but a different mixture of celebrity, virtue, and wealth.
And then this eventually also made its way to the US, where the characters on the board were exclusively white until 1974, when black children were finally represented as having a chance to climb the ladder, which, not a great look, not gonna lie. Between this, The Game of Life, and Monopoly, which, like Meritocracy, also started out satirizing the very thing it would come to represent, we've got a whole subgenre of merito-capitalist indoctrination for kids. But we can't talk about the history of meritocratic thinking without bringing up the Protestant work ethic.
Mr. Fox is hewing newly felled fir. Lucinda Fox is grinding Indian corn, while Brother Oliver milks the family goat. Today, as always, there's a full schedule of work ahead for the bachelors and the entire community.
Now, I'm not gonna get into a full history of the Protestant Reformation and Calvinism, but basically, in the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation happened, where Protestants broke away from the Catholics due in part to disagreements over how you got into heaven. One of the sects that broke off was Calvinism, and they believed in predestination, where you actually couldn't earn your way into heaven because God had already chosen for you whether you were getting saved or not. But that idea caused salvation anxiety in believers. They knew that God had already chosen for them whether they were going to heaven or hell, but they still wanted to know what their fate was going to be, even if there was nothing they could do to change it. So they started looking for signs, and they landed on the idea that if you were among God's chosen, that would probably be reflected in your life, not by any conscious choices you made, but just because you have this innate grace within you. And that reflection would manifest as worldly success. If you worked hard and were wealthy, that meant you were one of the chosen. But if you were lazy and impoverished, you weren't. But then, over time, as that association between hard work and godliness deepened, the logic started to get flipped.
It proved difficult, if not impossible, to resist the slide from viewing such worldly activity as a sign of election to viewing it as a source. Once I am encouraged to infer from my good works that I am among the elect, it is hard to resist the thought that my good works have somehow contributed to my election. It was hard to resist its meritocratic implication, that salvation is earned and that work is a source, not merely a sign of salvation, and that worldly success is a good indication of who is destined for salvation.
And then those Puritans eventually left Europe to come to the New World, and bing bang boom, now we're here with the Protestant work ethic thoroughly embedded into our everyday lives.
It isn't easy, this clearing of a wilderness. It isn't easy removing the stones from the rocky New England soil. But it makes a difference when you're building something new.
It doesn't look exactly the same as it did. We're a lot more consumerist than those original Calvinists and Puritans, but those beliefs have been baked into the US from the beginning. It started with the Puritans, but then came the Founding Fathers, where we had Thomas Jefferson writing about a natural aristocracy of virtue and talents, further instilling that society should be run by those who are most talented and hardest working. And then in the next century, we had brave pioneers fulfilling their manifest destiny with rugged individualism.
Men like Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, and finally the legendary Frame Johnson of Arizona.
You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it.
The Johnson boys, lawmen all, with 40 notches on their guns, as they blazed a peace trail from Dodge City to Tombstone. Starring Ronald Reagan as Frame Johnson.
Proving that all you need to succeed is hard work and grit and some bootstraps to pull yourself up by. Another meritocratic phrase that started out as satire, by the way. And today we've got MLMs telling us to be our own boss, gig work selling itself as a flexible side hustle, tech startups that prove that you just need a computer and an idea to make millions, and hustle grind set content creators telling us to monetize our passions and that sleep is for losers and burnout is good, actually.
My day is 6 a.m. to noon, and I'm not crazy. You're crazy for thinking it takes 24 hours, just like some dude in a cave did 300 years ago. My second day starts at noon and goes till 6 p.m. That's day 2. And then the next day is 6 p.m. to midnight. What I've done now is I have changed and manipulated time. I now get 21 days a week. Stack that up over a month, I'm going to kick your butt. Stack it up over a year, you're toast. Stack it up over 5 years, my entire life is different than it would have been otherwise.
We see billionaires and CEOs as visionaries and innovators, and anyone who isn't making a cool 6 figures is just lazy or irresponsible. We read their self-help books telling us how to find happiness, and then take their $500 course on how to find our personal brands. And we do all of it because we see their success as evidence that they're smarter or more responsible or just plain better than the rest of us. So, are they? If meritocracy is real, then those at the top are the best of us, and they are worth listening to. And if meritocracy is real, we can get to the top with them if we just try hard enough. Social mobility is possible with enough grit and determination. If meritocracy is real, our future is within our control. So, is it? You might feel like your future isn't within your control, and sometimes it can feel like the noise coming at you from ads and spammers is beyond your control too. In fact, your personal data, like your name, address, phone number, shopping habits, and even your social security number, are being collected and traded by companies all over the world, and you might not even know it. Now, technically, you have the right to request that these companies delete the information they have on you. But if you wanted to do that yourself, it would take years to find and contact every single source and leak. Luckily, that's where today's sponsor, Incogni, comes in. Incogni is a tool that helps you take back control of your personal data by reaching out to data brokers and dealing with all of that tedious stuff so you don't have to, and they make it really easy. First, you create your account, tell them whose data they'll be looking for, give them the right to work for you, and then you just set it and forget it. Easy peasy. Now, I've worked with Incogni a ton over the past year or two, and that's because it's a service I genuinely use and stand behind. As someone whose job is being a person on the internet, I have a lot of privacy concerns. But with Incogni, I don't have to worry about someone being able to find my home address on some random website. And whenever I hear about big data breaches on the news, I never even worry anymore because I know Incogni's got me covered. They've also recently introduced their custom removals feature, which lets you pick out specific sites for Incogni to focus on. Just send them a link to any site where your personal information is visible, and they'll get to work. And with their new unlimited and family unlimited plans, you can submit as many custom removal requests as you want. And if you're already using Incogni and want to upgrade, you can log into your dashboard and press custom removals to get started. So get in on this hot data privacy action by heading on over to incogni.com/ZoeB, where you can use code ZoeB to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. Again, that's incogni.com/ZoeB using code ZoeB, or by clicking the link below to take your personal data off the market. But with that, let's get back to the video. So, is our future within our control? Short answer, no. Long answer, it's complicated. So, if we do live in a meritocracy, success just comes down to how hard you work. And of course, anyone can work hard and persevere, and there aren't any big systemic forces affecting anything, so every single person would have the same chance to succeed. So we'd expect to see successful people come from all walks of life, regardless of where they started out, or of their gender or race. And those in the highest level positions should genuinely be the best and brightest among us, and that group of best and brightest would probably be broadly representative of all types of people. But if we don't live in a meritocracy, then success doesn't come down to how hard you work. It's more about systemic forces and wealth inequality and luck. So we should expect to see successful people come consistently from privileged backgrounds, and so they also probably won't necessarily be the best and brightest. So the big question is, which one of those situations do we see in reality? Well, let's look at environments where we expect to see individuals with merit and see what we find. Let's start with the classic. Ivy League universities. If the only thing that mattered for getting into an Ivy League was merit, then we'd see lots of different types of kids from all across the socioeconomic spectrum, right? Well, according to Michael Sandel in his book, The Tyranny of Merit,
2/3 of the students at Harvard and Stanford come from the top fifth of the income scale. Despite generous financial aid policies, fewer than 4% of Ivy League students come from the bottom fifth. At Harvard and other Ivy League colleges, there are more students from families in the top 1%, income of more than $630,000 per year, than there are students from all the families in the bottom half of the income distribution combined.
But, you might be saying, it's not just about money. There are lots of factors that go into being accepted into these elite colleges, like standardized test scores. And you're right. So let's take a look at who does the best on standardized tests. Studies show that kids from wealthy families tend to score much higher than kids from poor families on standardized tests like the SAT. Now, if we lived in a meritocracy, then anyone with enough studying could do well on the SAT. But that's just not what we see in reality. In reality,
SAT scores are highly correlated with wealth. The higher your family income, the higher your SAT score. At each successive rung on the income ladder, average SAT scores increase. For scores that put students in contention for the most selective colleges, the gap is especially stark. If you come from a family with an annual income greater than $200,000, your chance of scoring above 1,400 out of 1,600 is 1 in 5. If you come from a poor family, less than $20,000 per year, your chance is 1 in 50.
Is that the outcome you would expect to see in a fair system? I need to drink some tea, but I also need to keep talking. Or is it the outcome you'd see in a system that's rigged to keep heaping rewards onto the already privileged? But speaking of already privileged, let's turn our attention back to college grads. It's true that going to college does make someone more likely to get a good job, but counterintuitively, college doesn't actually do much to increase graduates' position on the economic ladder.
These schools have little impact on upward mobility because most of the students are well off in the first place. American higher education is like an elevator in a building that most people enter on the top floor.
And we know that being an Ivy League graduate doesn't always mean you're the best and the brightest, because Ivy League grads can just do the stupidest shit.
Oh my god. Someone save him. Oh my god. Oh yeah!
There's actually a whole section of this Tyranny of Merit book that is just dedicated to looking at various like all-star presidential cabinets, which are some of the most powerful positions in the entire country, which should be filled with the highest caliber people, and then documenting all of the terrible decisions that these cabinets have made. It's incredible. But you don't need an Ivy League degree to move up in the world, right? We've still got that American dream of working hard and making good choices to eventually become financially well off. Well, a group of researchers have studied actual economic mobility and the factors that affect one's ability to be economically mobile, and what they found wasn't exactly meritocratic. As it turns out, intergenerational wealth is really sticky. That is, whatever socioeconomic level your parents are at, it's likely that you will stay at that same level. But why? Well, to answer that question, the authors suggest two hypotheses. The credit constraint hypothesis, which implies that children from low-income families are disadvantaged because their families don't have the money needed to invest in them, and the complementarities hypothesis, which implies that they're disadvantaged because they find themselves in social contexts in which the payoffs to human capital investments are lower on average. In other words, one hypothesis is about individual monetary issues, and the other is about big structural issues that lie more outside of families' control. Now, in this paper, there's a lot of math, and it's the scary math too that's more letters than numbers, so I'm not going to get into it here. But the important thing to know is that they eventually figure out that while both of these hypotheses play a part in intergenerational wealth disparities, the structural issues, which is that second complementarities hypothesis, has more of an effect. They also argue that those individual issues, which have less of an effect on the overall wealth gap, would make a huge difference for the poorest families, but they have diminishing returns. That's this line at the top. While the systemic issues, which have more of an effect, are the opposite. The boost that the wealthiest families get from their complementarities is much bigger than it would be for poor families. That's this line over here. Wealth and a lack of wealth is sticky because the benefits and drawbacks compound on one another. It's not just about money, it's about everything.
Low-income families cannot as readily borrow the money needed to buy high-quality childcare and early childhood education, high-quality primary and secondary education, and after-school training and test preparation. These types of human capital are often not directly purchased, but instead are part of a package deal in which parents secure access to high-quality education and advantageous networks by buying or renting a home in an expensive neighborhood. And low-income parents may reap lower returns because they often live in neighborhoods that are stressful and provide few opportunities, and where children are exposed to crime, environmental toxins, eviction, incarceration, disadvantageous social networks, and stereotype threat. Returns for lower-income children are suppressed because of racial and class discrimination in hiring and promotion, a taste for cultural matching among hiring managers, a preference for hiring graduates from elite colleges, a shortage of social contracts and networks that could provide entrance to top firms, and the lack of a parental wealth backstop that allows higher-income children to pursue entrepreneurial opportunities and to maintain high reservation wages when they are unemployed. Therefore, even if low-income parents were to make more substantial investments in their children, it would not help them as much because they're typically living in contexts in which the returns to such investments are suppressed.
And these issues trickle down from one generation to another. If your parents don't have the support to help you, then it's harder for you to get into a position to then be able to help your children, and so on, generation after generation. So while low-income families struggle to make any economic headway, wealthy families retain their privileges.
Highly educated parents can expect higher returns because they are more likely to know how to help with schoolwork, to navigate the school system, and to select the highest payoff investments, which are further catalyzed insofar as highly educated parents A. provide books, after-school training, test preparation, and science-related summer camps, B. provide financial support that frees their children from needing to work while they go to school, and C. more generally make complementary investments that work well in concert with one another.
There are so many invisible privileges that wealthy people have outside of their wealth. It's about having knowledge and connections, sure, but it's also about being able to accept an unpaid internship because you can just live at home or have your parents help with rent. It's about being able to count on getting a healthy breakfast in the morning before school. It's about not just having access to books, but also having the time, space, and quiet in which to read them. Or, as Stephen McNamee puts it,
the non-merit advantages of being born wealthy are cumulative and substantial. The most important factor in terms of where people will end up in the socioeconomic pecking order of society is where they started in the first place.
The wealthier you are, the more the benefits stack, and the wealthier you stay. Or, to quote the man who invented the term itself,
inequality will remain as long as we assume it to be a law of nature, that those of higher occupational status must not only enjoy markedly superior education as well, but also, by right and of necessity, have a higher income into the bargain. Our society is divisible into the blessed and the unblessed, those who get the best and most of everything, and those who get the poorest and the least. This way lies the meritocracy, the society in which the gifted, the smart, the energetic, the ambitious, and the ruthless are carefully sifted out and helped towards their destined positions of dominance, where they proceed not only to enjoy the fulfillment of exercising their natural endowments, but also to receive a fat bonus thrown in for good measure.
So a lot of people's success simply comes down to the fact that they happened to be born in the right place at the right time to the right family. But it's also worth pointing out just how big of a factor this kind of luck is in success. Studies have shown that the chance of becoming a CEO is influenced by your name or month of birth. For instance, the number of CEOs born in June and July is much smaller than the number of CEOs born in other months. Those with names earlier in the alphabet are more likely to receive tenure at top departments. People with easy-to-pronounce names are judged more positively than those with difficult-to-pronounce names. Women with masculine-sounding names are more successful in legal careers, and taller people are more likely to both get better grades in school and make more money in their jobs as adults. So, are people born in the summer just naturally worse at business? Does your name really affect your skills? Are tall people truly smarter than everyone else? Probably not. There are 1,000 reasons that these features could affect someone's life. Some are just genuine differences. Like, because the school year starts at the same time for everyone, your birth month determines how developed your brain and body are when you start school. But other traits, like where our names fall in alphabetical order or how tall we are, only matter because of the shortcuts our brains take when making decisions. People are more likely to pick names at the top of a list simply because they see them first. And taller students tend to literally stand out more or be seen as more mature or better at sports than their peers. But other features matter due to biases and social stigma. If you have an ethnic-sounding name, you might not get a call back about a job. If you have a name that's too feminine, your resume might get passed over. Now, no one is going to outright say that you're being overlooked because of your name. They usually couch it in the language of how good a fit someone would be, or how strong a candidate seems, or whether they seem like leadership material. But let's be honest, that probably has more to do with how racist or sexist the hiring manager is rather than how skilled the applicants actually are. But outside of these sorts of biases, it's not that someone gets promoted because their last name starts with an A instead of a W, or you lost out on a job because you were born in July rather than March. It's just that there are 1,000 little factors completely outside of our control that end up nudging us forward or holding us back by changing how others perceive and interact with us. And over an entire lifetime, those little nudges can really add up, resulting in huge differences in outcomes by the end of someone's life. So it's not that our futures are entirely determined for us from the moment we're born. It's just that the relationship between our actions and our success in life isn't as clear-cut as we've been led to believe. Our successes and failures come down to so much more than talent and hard work. Sometimes it really is just luck. But Zoe, I hear you say, are you saying my achievements are worthless? I worked hard, and if I did it, so can anyone. Now, I understand the impulse. I really do. I worked my ass off in school. I was valedictorian in high school and then graduated near the top of my class in both college and grad school. It's actually really funny. So when I made my grading video a few years ago, I remember getting a bunch of comments that were like, oh, you're only saying grades are bad because you didn't do well in school and you just want to feel better about yourself. And it's like, it's very funny to me. Anyway. I have accomplished a lot. I have been a very good student my whole life, and I like to think that I did all of this myself. But I didn't. Not really. I was lucky enough to be born into a family that put a huge emphasis on education. My parents consistently prioritized school, and we always had a ton of books in the house. We weren't rich by any means, and my parents struggled with food insecurity for the first few years of my life, but they were both college graduates, and my mom even worked at a university. My siblings and I each had our own bedroom, and even though our house wasn't huge, where we lived was safe and quiet. Our county had good schools, not great schools, but pretty good, and we had a bunch of AP classes to choose from and some genuinely phenomenal teachers. So yes, I worked hard, but I didn't get here by myself, and I was really lucky. So when I talk about success being largely dependent on factors outside of our control, I'm not dismissing anyone's hard work. It's not that your accomplishments are meaningless. It's just worth recognizing how much of your success is because of things you had no control over. And this is part of why the, well, everyone has the same 24 hours argument rings so hollow, because no, they don't. Like, grad school is hard enough on its own, but imagine trying to take classes while raising kids, Or what if you have to have 2 full-time jobs just to keep your head above water? What if your car breaks down so you have to take public transportation? What if your car breaks down and you live somewhere where there is no public transportation? What if you're disabled? What if you become disabled and suddenly you have to relearn what normal looks like for you? What if you're a woman or a person of color or an immigrant or trans and you always have to have a chunk of brain power dedicated to making sure that you can avoid the threats that other people don't even think about? This is what people mean when they talk about privilege. It's not that privileged people don't have any challenges. I mean, graduate school is still hard. It's just that people in less privileged situations have extra challenges on top of the normal ones. Going to grad school while raising kids is harder. But I think people really struggle with acknowledging this because we've been convinced that we have to do things on our own, or at least look like we're doing things on our own. But it's worth asking why that matters so much. Like, genuinely, why is it important to you that you do things by yourself? What does that prove? Because really, none of us did anything by ourselves. We all benefit so much from other people's work. Public roads, public schools, public parks, public safety. No one gets anywhere on their own. And being honest about that doesn't make your accomplishments meaningless. So, okay, we don't live in a perfect meritocracy, but so what? Like, sure, things could be better, but what is the actual harm of it? Well, I am glad you asked, because there's actually a lot of harm being done in the name of meritocracy. You know what? I'm actually gonna go sit down for this one. All right, where was I? Right, there is a lot of harm being done in the name of meritocracy. The most obvious casualties of meritocracy culture are the so-called losers, the ones who don't make it to the top with hard work. And this is because they get the short end of the meritocratic promise. If success is something you earn, then failure must be something you deserve. And that sort of thinking can really mess a person up. Consider prosperity gospel, the idea that with sufficient effort and faith, people can achieve health and wealth, a concept that Michael Sandel calls relentlessly meritocratic. But, as he goes on to say,
as with all meritocratic ethics, its exalted conception of individual responsibility is gratifying when things go well, but demoralizing, even punitive, when things go badly. Consider health. What could be more empowering than the belief that our health is in our hands, that the sick can be healed through prayer, that illness can be averted by living well and loving God? But this hyper-agency has a dark side. Illness, when it comes, is not merely a misfortune, but a verdict on our virtue. Even death adds insult to injury.
He then brings up an example from Republican Congressman Mo Brooks, who was challenged about his support for repealing the Affordable Care Act, specifically the fact that doing so would make healthcare more expensive for people with pre-existing conditions. Now, Brooks didn't deny that, and in fact, he basically said, yeah, actually, that's a feature and not a bug. He argued that higher costs for sick people were fair because it would lower costs for those people who lead good lives. They're healthy. They've done things to keep their bodies healthy. Done things the right way. But this implies that the opposite is also true, right? That people who have health issues have done things the wrong way, and thus they should pay more. This is actually a position that lots of people hold. Like, we might not blame kids for getting sick, but we do sort of just shrug when we see a lifelong smoker get lung cancer, right? If you didn't want cancer, you shouldn't have smoked. If you didn't want to struggle with addiction, you shouldn't have tried drugs. If you didn't want heart issues, you shouldn't have gotten fat. It's always their fault. There's always more that they could have done to stop themselves from getting sick. I actually want to connect this to a Some More News video about America's obsession with weight that I've been thinking about a lot since it came out. In this video, they make an argument that's actually pretty straightforward, but I had never heard it before, so it just really stuck with me. Essentially, all of these food companies and restaurant chains have specifically engineered their foods to be addictive. And this is relatively common knowledge, right? And yet, for some reason, we blame individuals for falling prey to this addictive food, for literally just having the normal brain responses to advertisements, which have also been specifically designed to trick our brains, and to the chemicals in the foods, rather than blaming the companies for making these things so addictive.
Bet you can't pick just one.
Bet you can't eat just one. You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies. Better? Better.
To the people who reach into a carton of warm, crispy, golden, perfectly salted McDonald's world-famous fries and return with just one. Who are you, and how do you do that? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This is also part of why people love stories about disabled people overcoming their disabilities, because it shows that, yes, don't worry, your health is completely within your control. No matter what happens, where there's a will, there's a way. But this isn't just the case with health either. It's true of all kinds of success and failure states in society. Everything comes down to the individual and their actions. If they found success, it's because they worked hard and made good choices. If they found failure, it's their own damn fault. If you can't find a job, it's because you're not looking hard enough, or your resume isn't good enough, or you didn't get the right degree. If you're struggling with rent, it's because you live above your means, or you should have moved to a cheaper city, or you're wasting money on luxuries like avocado toast and air conditioning.
I'm talking about the cultured, cosmopolitan, goat's milk latte drinking, avocado toast eating insiders elite.
If your house isn't clean or your appearance has changed, you must have really let yourself go. If you're depressed, it's because you need to go outside more and adopt a positive mindset. Have you tried yoga? Sandel describes it as a two-part hollowness: the frustration that arises when the system falls short of its meritocratic promise, when those who work hard and play by the rules are unable to advance, and the despair that arises when people believe the meritocratic promise has already been fulfilled and they have lost out. This is a more demoralizing discontent because it implies that for those left behind, their failure is their fault. The world is telling you it's not meritocracy that's broken, it's you. And the most ironic part is that this kind of shaming actually does the opposite of what people think it does. So when someone who believes in meritocratic individualism is struggling to find success and blames themselves for their struggles, this can be so demoralizing that it actually ends up hurting their ability to overcome those struggles in the first place. As one study explains,
all else equal, among lower SES socioeconomic status individuals, holding strong meritocratic beliefs during the late teenage period increases the chances of having a precarious work situation later in life, and decreases the chances of being fully working. When the hurdles faced by the individuals during their formative years clash with their meritocratic beliefs, the frustration generated and their lowered self-efficacy will eventually impact their decisions and performance. So strong believers have more chances to face labor market difficulties in their early adulthood period.
So, in other words, if you believe strongly in the meritocracy but end up struggling to get ahead, which could simply be the fault of your disadvantaged starting point, you're going to get frustrated and blame yourself. And if those frustrations pile up and your self-blaming gets worse and worse, that's probably going to affect your performance. So blaming people for their own problems doesn't make things better, but it still happens. And there's one group in particular who gets the brunt of this abuse. It's what Sandel calls the last acceptable prejudice, the bias against the undereducated. While other prejudices are more readily called out and attempted to be remedied, being dismissive of people with lower levels of education is just fine and normal, I guess. Michael Sandel often brings up a study where some researchers surveyed a bunch of people in a bunch of different countries, including the US, and asked them to essentially rate how they felt about different types of people in order to measure bias. He describes their findings, writing that college-educated respondents had more bias against less educated people than they did against other disfavored groups. The researchers surveyed attitudes towards a range of people who were typically victims of discrimination. In Europe, this list included Muslims and people who are poor, obese, blind, and less educated. In the United States, the list also included African Americans and the working class. Of all of these groups, the poorly educated were disliked most of all. And if you read the study itself, it gets even worse, because not only do college-educated respondents hate the poorly educated hate the poorly educated too.
To a large extent, lower educated people endorse the negative evaluations that are made about them. We conclude that there are no indications that less educated people resist the negative attributions made about them, and even seem to internalize them.
As I mentioned, this is an acceptable prejudice because, as the study concludes, if educational outcomes are seen as largely deserved, then their consequences are too, and they then even explicitly suggest that there's a link between the ideology of meritocracy and people's opinions about educational inequality, or as Sandel phrases it,
the elites are unembarrassed by their prejudice. Because of the meritocratic emphasis on individual responsibility, they consider poverty and class status to be, at least in part, due to factors beyond one's control, but they consider low educational achievement to represent a failure of individual effort, and therefore the fault of those who do not make it to college.
And again, like with other prejudices against meritocratic losers, this type of bias can have a detrimental effect on the people being discriminated against. I found one study that showed that education discrimination is linked to mental health issues like depression and anxiety, but honestly, there hasn't been a ton of research into this yet, which I think just sort of goes to show just how dismissive people are of this issue. But all of these problems that I've talked about so far are even further exacerbated by the idolization of winners. Like, at least with an aristocracy, the people in power were honest about things and didn't try to convince the poor that they could someday be aristocrats too if they just tried hard enough. But now, people in power dangle success stories in front of us and parade them around, telling us, see, this could be you one day. This is part of why I have such a problem with the "but Oprah" argument. So people like to say that the existence of Oprah proves that anyone can make it from abject poverty to billionaire status as long as they have grit and determination and resilience or whatever. But the thing is, Oprah's story is such a big deal because it's so rare. And like, good for her. Like, I'm glad that she was able to overcome everything and find success, #girlboss. But I think that you can acknowledge her hard-fought success while still acknowledging that she never should have had to fight so hard in the first place. Because for every Oprah, there are millions of people who never make it out at all. The existence of one lucky winner doesn't erase all the people who were never even given the chance to try. It makes me think of that Stephen Jay Gould quote, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." I also think it's important to acknowledge the sheer number of success stories that are just fabrications. Like J.K. Rowling. Everyone knows her story, right? Homeless mother of 3 who wrote Harry Potter on the back of napkins and was rejected by 100 publishers before becoming a billionaire with a whole fantasy empire, right? Well, that's not entirely accurate. As friend of the channel Kaylin Conrad explains in their video about a biographical Lifetime original movie about Rowling's life,
the truth of the matter is, Joanne always had a safety net that few people in poverty do. From friends handing her cash, to family offering her a place to stay, to friends giving her money to go back to school, apartment deposits, furniture, all while having all the privilege being white and educated provides you. Almost nobody in poverty would have access to all of that, and nobody who had access to all of that should ever claim to be as poor as it's possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. Yes, she rose beyond her middle-class upbringing, but it was not on the back of her hard work alone, but on the collective backs of thousands of workers, some of whom made minimum wage, some of whom were likely children, or slaves, or both. Odd. A depressing ending.
You should also definitely go watch this video because Kaylin is genuinely one of the funniest people I know. But anyway, the problem is that elites and the media love these kinds of rags to riches stories because they keep the dream alive.
How many times were you turned down the first time
My
before
agent
you were published? Yeah.
knows better than I do. I don't know, but it was a lot. A lot of people didn't want it. A lot of people just sent it back virtually by return of post. It was like boomerang.
Like,
you know?
what is this?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
made you keep trying?
I did really believe in it. I just thought, no, this is a good story. for some reason, and I wasn't very resilient at all at that time of my life, I was a wreck in a lot of ways, but for some reason, I can even remember being quite pleased with, I know this sounds masochistic, but I was even quite pleased with the rejection letters. Oh, Scott Fitzgerald got these, you know, it's just like, it's all part of being a writer. You've got to be rejected a bit first. I just had faith in the story.
But as great as keeping the dream alive sounds, as Joe Littler explains, they're really only giving us enough hope to keep us in our place.
The stories of the ones who made it, their inner talent and drive causing them to rise up against the odds, are spotlighted, awarded a mediated power, and packaged into parables of progress through which to shame the rest.
It's like the pit in The Dark Knight Rises.
There's a reason why this prison is the worst hell on earth. Hope. Every man who was rotted here over the centuries has looked up to the light and imagined climbing to freedom. So easy. So simple.
But Zoe, I hear you saying, Batman escapes the pit. And like Batman, there are some winners. People succeed within the system all the time. And you're right, Batman does escape. But I want to ask you something. Do you remember what he puts himself through to be able to do that?
Ah! God! Ah!
I bring this up because meritocracy hurts winners, too. Now, I know that I just spent the whole first chunk of this video talking about how wealthy people have all of these privileges and benefits that mean that their wealth is sticky and their kids have an easier time scoring well on the SAT and getting into prestigious universities and landing high-paying jobs, but...
To those in the midst of the hyper-competitive struggle, it is impossible to view success as anything other than the result of individual effort and achievement. This is the standpoint that generates the conviction among the winners that they have earned their success, that they have made it on their own. This belief can be criticized as a form of meritocratic hubris, but there is also poignance in this belief, for it is forged in pain, in the soul-destroying demands that meritocratic striving inflicts upon the young. Prosperous parents are able to give their kids a powerful boost in the bid for admission to elite colleges, but often at the cost of transforming their high school years into a high-stress, anxiety-ridden, sleep-deprived gauntlet of advanced placement courses, test prep tutoring, sports training, dance and music lessons, and a myriad of extracurricular and public service activities, often under the advice and tutelage of private admissions consultants whose fees can cost more than 4 years at Yale. For those who lack the apparatus of advantage, it is unfair. For children entangled in the apparatus, it is oppressive.
Even those of us who succeed within the system end up burnt out and tired. We're filled with anxiety and imposter syndrome. When every success is treated as just the next step on an endless ladder, it's hard to feel joy or pride in your work. So you just feel relief that you haven't fallen behind. Because you will fall behind if you make a bad choice or screw up. When you've been taught that hard work is the only reason you're ahead, you're also taught that slowing down means failure. Needing help is failure. Burnout is just personal weakness. When we're told that our future is in our hands, that our success or failure is our sole responsibility, and that we have to work hard and never stop working hard, it's a heavy burden. Meritocracy hurts everyone. But if this system does so much harm to everyone, why have we kept it around? Well, for one thing, meritocracy is easy. Earlier this year, I made a video about how humans don't like chaos, and we keep inventing all of these fictions to make us feel like we have control over things. We can't help but impose structures on everything we interact with, even if it means simplifying things down into easy, broad heuristics. We want to find logic that explains the chaos of reality because chaos is scary. The universe is big and life is messy. And if we really had to come to terms with how little we actually understand, let alone have control over, it would terrify us. Meritocracy is one of those fictions that we've invented. We're desperately holding on to the belief that we can make our lives better through our own hard work. because the alternative is to acknowledge that life is unpredictable and we don't have as much control as we think we do. And acknowledging that makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel small and weak. It is, as one paper puts it, a recipe for helplessness. So we push the idea of powerlessness out of our brain. We hold on to the idea that we do have power and control. But there's actually one specific group who more readily accepts this fiction. Among those with lower incomes, local contexts of greater inequality are associated with more widespread belief that people can get ahead if they're willing to work hard. It makes sense that poor people would be more likely to hold meritocratic beliefs, especially when they're confronted with the reality of inequality in their everyday lives, because they have the most to gain if meritocracy is real, and the most to lose if it's not. Now, another study supported this argument, arguing that belief in meritocracy can serve as an important tool of psychological resilience for low-income individuals who regularly come into contact, directly or indirectly, with others who are better off than they are. Though such contact may highlight an individual's current lowly position in the income distribution, it can also make escape via upward income mobility more conceivable and plausible. In other words, a lot of the time, belief in meritocracy is a coping mechanism. Now, I know that that doesn't sound all that bad. Like, why should we be upset that people are finding ways to cope with the innate powerlessness of existence? After all, the myth of meritocracy affirms a certain idea of freedom. This is the idea that our destiny is in our hands, that our success does not depend on forces beyond our control, that it's up to us. This is an exhilarating vision of human agency. We are responsible for our fate. We succeed or fail based on our merits. We get what we deserve. So what's the problem with that? Well, I don't know that it's necessarily always a bad thing to create mental frameworks that make reality easier to swallow, but it's important to remember that frameworks aren't neutral tools. They actively shape the way that we engage with the world around us. And the more we rely on a framework, the more it trains us to interpret everything through its logic, until it stops feeling like an interpretation at all. It's like wearing sunglasses. At first, you're aware of the tint, but after a while, your eyes adjust and the shaded view starts to feel normal. So normal that you might even forget you're wearing sunglasses at all. So in the case of meritocracy, it's like the world's comfiest pair of sunglasses. It's a tool that we created to help reality not seem so harsh, and through its lenses we see a world that's fair, where effort leads to success and where there is some quantifiable metric of merit that gives us objective answers for how we should distribute resources. It gives us easy solutions to all of our problems. And this is fine as long as we remember that it is artificial. Because if you forget that you're wearing sunglasses, you forget that what you're seeing isn't real, and you start to believe that maybe the sun really isn't all that bright, and anyone complaining about the harsh light is just being dramatic or weak. If they're upset about the light, that's a them problem. After all, you can see just fine. And the same is true with meritocracy. Because it gives us such a comforting view of the world, we've started to forget that that view is artificial. Instead, we believe that the world really is fair, that effort really does lead to success, and that merit really can be objectively measured to decide who gets what. If other people are upset about the system being unfair, that just means that they didn't work hard enough. After all, you made it through just fine. But there's another reason that having such a comforting source of control over your life can be dangerous. It's easy to take advantage of. When you feel like you have no control over your life, when someone offers you that control, you'll take anything you can get. And meritocracy is an easy concept to co-opt.
Some socialists seem to believe that people should be numbers in a state computer. We believe they should be individuals. We're all unequal. No one, thank heavens, is quite like anyone else, however much the socialists may pretend otherwise. And we believe that everyone has the right to be unequal. But to us, every human being is equally important.
It's time for all of us to join together in looking to the new world marketplace not as a source of fear and uncertainty, but in the way that Americans have always looked at challenges as a great opportunity. another frontier for the American spirit as America's next great adventure.
Since the 70s, but especially into the 80s and 90s, the myth of meritocracy was used as a political tool to great success. And in those early days, the myth was fairly straightforward. If you work hard, you'll succeed. Just classic American dream stuff. But over the past couple of decades, there's been a shift. As this classic American dream stuff has been shown over and over and over to be getting more and more out of reach, people are starting to question whether they really can climb up the ladder through hard work alone. They're getting disillusioned, frustrated with their social immobility. So when politicians talk about giving the working class a hand up, it rings hollow. But then, someone comes along who offers a different kind of meritocracy. One where it's not about climbing your way up the ladder, but about tearing down those who have been given an unfair boost to the top.
These are the forgotten men and women of our country, and they are forgotten, but they're not going to be forgotten long. These are people who work hard, but no longer have a voice. I am your voice.
The rhetoric of rising had, by 2016, lost its capacity to inspire. Donald Trump did not speak about upward mobility or the belief that Americans can rise as far as their talent and hard work will take them. Instead, he offered blunt talk of winners and losers and promised to make America great again. Many working-class supporters of Trump seemed less interested in promises of upward mobility than in reassertions of national sovereignty, identity, and pride. They resented meritocratic elites, experts, and professional classes who stood astride the hierarchy of merit and looked down with disdain on those they considered less accomplished than themselves.
Many of Trump's voters feel cheated by a system that promised rewards for hard work and never delivered. And now they feel looked down on by the elites who shamed them for not going to college or who were telling them to just learn to code. And Trump weaponizes that. He takes their frustration, that very real sense of loss and betrayal, and gives it a target. It's elites or immigrants or undeserving welfare recipients.
The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you. It's true. And these are the best and the finest. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Trump doesn't promise mobility so much as revenge. His meritocracy isn't about lifting the poor, but validating the rage of those who feel left behind. He tells them that the system was rigged by people who look down on them, but now it's their turn to win.
For Trump voters, the rhetoric of rising was more insulting than inspiring. This is not because they rejected meritocratic beliefs. To the contrary, they embraced meritocracy, but believed it described the way things already worked. They did not see it as an unfinished project requiring further government action to dismantle barriers to achievement. This is partly because they feared such intervention would favor ethnic and racial minorities, thus violating rather than vindicating meritocracy as they saw it.
And that is exactly what Trump has continued to do. He's continued to claim that efforts to fix inequality are actually just giving unfair advantages to marginalized groups, making it so any demands for equity are seen as attacks on standards altogether.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life.
So as I was finishing this script, Trump signed an executive order called Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy. And if you take those words at face value, that sounds great, right? Opportunity and meritocracy being restored? Hell yeah. But if you actually sit down and read the thing, what it actually does isn't restore opportunity, but dismantle civil rights protections. So basically, the order makes it harder to challenge discrimination by getting rid of disparate impact liability, which basically means that it doesn't matter if your policies sound neutral. If their impact is exclusionary, then they're fair game to be challenged. But Trump wants to undo that because, as the fact sheet about the order explains, disparate impact liability violates the Constitution's guarantee of equal treatment for all by requiring race-oriented policies and practices to rebalance outcomes. In other words, he is mandating that the fairness of policies should be based on what they say on the tin, not based on how fair they actually are in practice. Because as long as there's no facially discriminatory policy or practice or discriminatory intent, then that means that the policy is fair, and therefore any differences in outcomes is totally fine. All of this is based on a bedrock principle of the United States, which guarantees equality of opportunity, but not equal outcomes. But the problem with equality of opportunity is that it's super squishy.
More. So that's why you was hiding.
Like, sure, a policy might say that everyone can apply for a job or buy a house or start a business, but the reality around those rules tends to be a lot messier. Like, technically, small business loans are open to anyone, but loan approval algorithms often score applicants partly based on zip codes, and thanks to decades of redlining, those zip codes still track pretty closely with race and class. So the impact is that it's harder for poor people and people of color to start businesses. But according to Trump, as long as the policy doesn't outright say that poor people or people of color should be blocked from starting businesses, then it's fine. It's about the appearance of fairness without any consideration for any of the surrounding context. And the same thing applies to merit, too. Come on. Oh, there he is. It's the boy. The boy has arrived. Oh. When people say they want to restore merit-based hiring, there's an underlying assumption that merit is a neutral thing that can be objectively measured.
That this is not a time for equity. Equity is a very different word than equality.
Everyone wants doctors and engineers and pilots who are skilled and have the right credentials, but just like with equality of opportunity, there's a lot of surrounding context that gets ignored here. Like, does attending an Ivy League mean that someone is intelligent, or just that their parents had money? If someone presented at a conference in their field, does that say more about their research, or more about their ability to afford travel and registration fees? Is it hard work that got someone a summer internship in DC? Or was it their connections and ability to cover housing in one of the most expensive cities in the country?
Hey guys, here's a day in my life as an intern in DC. I started my day by walking to work. I'm lucky enough that my apartment's only about 25 minutes away from where I work, so I get to enjoy the sights and sounds of DC every morning on my commute.
In Fairfax and Montgomery counties, it takes 35% of the average teacher's salary to afford one-bedroom rent. In DC, the number rises to 39%. Redhelm tells me low pay in teaching has him contemplating leaving the profession.
Even standards like professionalism often rely on unspoken cultural expectations about how someone should dress and speak and behave, and they tend to favor those who already fit into dominant upper-middle-class norms.
According to a 2023 workplace research study, Black women's hair is more likely to be perceived as unprofessional. Nearly half of Black women under the age of 34 feel pressured to have a headshot with straight hair. A 2019 research study for women found that Black women are 80% more likely to change their natural hair to meet social norms or expectations at work.
We see merit and equality of opportunity as neutral, objective measures, but they're really just catch-all terms for whatever society values. And what society values right now is wealthy and white and male. For instance, meritocratic combat standards are presented as being gender neutral, but in reality, they tend to favor things that men are good at, like brute strength, while undervaluing things that women tend to be good at, like flexibility and endurance, even when often those feminine skills might actually be more useful in combat situations.
A huge one is women in combat and quotas. I think the way they pushed that under Obama in a way that had nothing, zero to do with efficacy, zero to do with lethality and capability.
You don't like women in combat?
No.
Why not?
I love women service members who contribute amazingly because everything about men and women serving together makes the situation more complicated, and complication in combat means casualties are worse.
But because there is no one true definition of merit, and merit is culturally determined, it makes the perfect culture war weapon. It's a rhetorical black box that can hold whatever ideology you want it to. And this is how Trump is able to get away with using meritocracy to demonize true equality, and then present his legally codified bigotry as the real version of equality, thereby replacing our old definition of merit with his new one. Some people use this as a gotcha for Trump voters, like, oh, Trump says that he wants to restore merit, but then he made Pete Hegseth Secretary of Defense. How is that merit? But this really only works as a gotcha if you assume that Trump and his base are using the same definition of merit that you are. But they're not. And that's the point. Oh. Happy goes. The MAGA movement is framed as being on the side of ordinary people against a corrupt elite that perpetuated the policies producing declining living standards, as Joe Littler puts it. So Trump couldn't exactly use the same definition of merit that those corrupt elites used, right? Like, they're the problem. Those leftist journalists and Marxist professors and green new scam scientists are the reason that the system is broken. Them and their woke DEI pronouns. I love this. Oh, this is a danger. I am in danger. Help! So, as Littler writes, Trump has dropped previous notions of merit associated with exclusive elites and expert knowledge in favor of a definition that prioritizes successfully emoting about your passion and drive, and the ability to parlay talent, anti-elitism, and ostensible entrepreneurial acumen with working hard to make it to the top. In other words, merit is no longer about expertise or experience. It's about vibes. It's a performance. What actually matters is not whether you actually earned your position, but whether you can make it look earned, whether you can convincingly play the part. Why else would he fill his cabinet with news hosts and entertainers? But this sort of shift isn't limited to politics. Wherever meritocracy can be found, there's also a sense of performativity, of having to prove that you fit the mold of what we think someone who deserves success looks like. And this is especially true in entertainment, because what could be more entertaining than making people prove their worth in front of millions of critical viewers?
We see incredible people who still have that determination and that dream.
It has to be a total package. They have to entertain us, they have to wow us, they have to surprise us.
I don't think you can be on this show without your life changing.
Rising up the social hierarchy is a narrative with considerable history, tending to appear in different forms and with different articulations wherever there is social inequality. Stories about working really hard to activate your talent form the structural template of many media texts. From self-help books through magazines to reality TV, presenting the journey of ordinary subjects who become spotlighted and fashioned into moralizing parables of meritocracy. Perhaps nowhere has climbing the ladder of competitive individualism been represented so vividly as in the crystalline example of the genre of reality TV shows that are structured around making it. Wildly successful transnational franchises such as American Idol, The Apprentice, The Voice, America's Got Talent, and Top Model repeatedly address ordinary subjects who can make it to the top of their particular profession, particularly in the performing arts and business, through hard work.
Think about how Mr. Beast has a habit of justifying who deserves to get the money from his inane challenges by showing that they lost a family member or were the victim of a natural disaster or poverty. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to give help to those who have been affected by disasters or poverty. It's the fact that those situations are being used to justify who deserves to get money that is the problem.
So I did my first brand deal. It's offered $5,000. I was like, double it, and I'll walk outside, I'll give it to a homeless person. And they're like, no, you won't. And I was like, double it. And I was like pacing around my neighborhood for 3 hours convincing this guy, like on the phone, just double the money. I promise the video will go viral and I'll give it to homeless person. I was like, $10,000 just looks better in a title. It'll get more views. I promise your app will do better.
Reality TV and game shows are built around making people prove their worth. Because we couldn't imagine just giving someone $50,000, but if they're willing to eat insects on Fear Factor or recite obscure trivia on Jeopardy, then suddenly it's fine. We couldn't just give someone a brand new house, but if they've endured heartbreaking struggles and cried convincingly enough on camera, then Extreme Makeover Home Edition will do exactly that.
Our home is in a poor condition. A lot of things are not working in our house.
It's basically falling apart. You've got holes in the floor, you've got holes in the windows, you've got electricity, but no running water.
It's like that meme about mozzarella sticks, like, would you eat 6 string cheeses in one sitting? No? Well, what if we bread them, deep fry them, and serve them with marinara sauce? Like, it sounds absurd until we cover it in something more palatable. This logic might also explain all of the hate directed towards Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton and other celebrities, especially women who are just famous for being famous. Like, there's this unspoken standard of who deserves to be famous and wealthy, and if they've gotten all of these rewards without visibly earning them, then people get mad. It might also be why we love to hate mid-pop stars, think Rebecca Black or Carly Rae Jepsen, because why should they get all of this attention when they're not even that good? How dare someone become rich or famous without proving to us that they deserve it? And because people hate undeserving winners so much, the wealthy elite, the winners of society, try really hard to prove that they are deserving of their wealth. There's a whole section in Littler's book about the different personas that the wealthy elite take on to accomplish this. There's normcore plutocrats who essentially pretend to be hardworking normies to convince us that they earned everything they have. Like, Elon Musk is a gamer and has a tiny house and sleeps in his office, and Taylor Swift is just a silly millennial cat lady. They're just like you.
You don't know how this goes, but I just thought I'd explain it to you. Is that cool?
Then there's the kind parents who tell us that they deserve their wealth because they're doing good things with it. Think of Bill Gates and his philanthropy, or Mark Cuban and his prescription drug company. It's okay that they have more money than God because they're doing God's work. Or as Littler puts it,
it is fine that they rule us. In fact, it is better because firstly, they have worked hard to activate their talent to achieve individualized greatness. And secondly, because emotionally, effectively, they are just so kind.
And finally, there's the luxury flaunters who don't try to hide how wealthy they are, but instead show it off in an attempt to make us feel envy, desire, and resentment, or to be pointlessly aspirational at the spectacle of their wealth. These are the rich kids of Instagram and the out-of-touch family vloggers who live out our what if I won the lottery dreams for us. We kind of hate them because, like, do they really deserve all that money? But we also kind of want to be them. The wealthy will do pretty much anything to prove to us that they deserve what they have. But again, as I keep bringing up, this also implies the opposite. If the wealthy deserve what they have, then the poor, or those who aren't working as hard as the wealthy, don't. Like, it sounds paradoxical, but think about the myth of welfare queens, or for a more recent example, the outrage that migrants were being housed in luxury hotel rooms in New York. People get so angry when someone gets something they don't deserve, and that anger can be taken advantage of by the wealthy elite in order to turn society into a reverse Robin Hood, where we redistribute wealth from the greedy families using food stamps to buy Pepsi back to the hard-working CEOs who deserve it.
In this version of Robin Hood, the traditional poor, the unemployed, the disabled, refugees, have been put into the conceptual box where the rich used to be. It is they, the social category previously labeled poor, who are accused of living in big houses, wallowing in luxury, and not needing to work, while those previously considered rich are redesignated as the ones who work terribly hard, forced to support this new category of poor who are considered rich. In this version, the Sheriff of Nottingham runs a ruthless realm of plunder and political correctness, ransacking the homesteads of honest peasants for money to finance the conceptual rich. That is, the unemployed, the disabled, refugees, working-class single mothers, dodgers, scroungers, chavs, chiselers, and cheats. In this version of the myth, Robin Hood is a tax cutter and a handout denouncer. He's Jeremy Clarkson, he's Nigel Farage, he's Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. He's by your elbow in the pub, telling you he knows an immigrant who just waltzed into the Social Security office and walked out with a check for £1,000. He's on talk radio denouncing inheritance tax. He's winning elections.
The wealthy are honestly so sensitive. They're all like Elon Musk. They're playing life like it's a pay-to-win video game, but still bending over backwards trying to convince us that they did it all themselves because they are desperate to be liked. And sure, it's a little sad, but it's also a time-tested strategy for holding on to the power they have. As Littler puts it,
the rich will frequently talk extremely loudly about how hard they work, especially when their money comes from unearned income, trying to offset extensive privilege by framing their activity in terms of manual labor.
While there, I was just doing constant 100-hour weeks, and that's definitely wearing. And you know, now I'm kind of in the 80 to 90, which is more manageable.
I mean, you just have to put in, you know, 80 to 100-hour weeks every week.
Gosh,
and then
a lot of work.
The old 7 days a week, sleeping at the factory. I worked in the paint shop, general assembly, body shop.
You ever worry about yourself imploding, like it's just too much?
Absolutely. No one should put this many hours into work. This is not good. And people should not work this hard. They should not do this. It's very painful.
she goes on to remark on the urgency with which the wealthy keep up their performances, how they feel the need to pretend that they're not an elite at all. And they do this for good reason, because if they were honest about how the game is rigged, if they acted their wage, it would not go well. They have to insistently present themselves as hardworking and meritocratic in order to keep the idea of social mobility churning and to legitimate their own position and protect their own interests. If Elon Musk posts about how many games he plays, maybe we'll forget about the oligarchy. If Mark Zuckerberg dresses in a t-shirt and jeans often enough, maybe we'll forget about his monopoly. If Warren Buffett lives in the same modest house for another few decades, maybe we'll forget that Berkshire Hathaway owns everything. We're just normal guys, we swear.
So for a while, my daughters were pretty convinced that my actual job was Mark's Meats, which is our kind of ranch and like the cattle that we ranch. I was like, well, not quite, and you'll learn when you get older. But I think that there's something that's just like much more tangible about that than taking them to the office and sitting in product reviews or something for some like piece of software that we're writing.
Well, it's certainly a lot more primal.
Yeah, we have this land, we take care of it, just like you mow the grass. We need to make sure that these populations are in check. It's part of what we do.
It's as if globalization's winners needed to persuade themselves and everyone else that those perched on top and those at the bottom have landed where they belong, says Sandel. And for the ones who actually believe their own propaganda, they're literally just the "I made this" meme. They need constant reassurance that they have indeed won the game, that they really are very special, that they really are better than the rest of us. And if that's not bad enough, they're forcing us to go along with it. As Max Weber puts it,
the fortunate man is seldom satisfied with the fact of being fortunate. Beyond this, he needs to know that he has a right to his good fortune. He wants to be convinced that he deserves it, and above all, that he deserves it in comparison with others. He wishes to be allowed the belief that the less fortunate also merely experience his due.
What's worse, though, is that if you take all of this to its logical conclusion, you end up at Citizens United, dark money, and campaign finance loopholes. Seriously, think about it. If the wealthy really did work hard and rightfully earn all of their money, then they truly do deserve to have all the nice things that money can buy. It's their money, so they can do whatever they want with it, right? Why should anyone, including the government, be able to tell the ultra-wealthy what they can or cannot do with the money they rightfully earned? We all vote with our dollars, they just happen to have more dollars with which to vote. They won, so they get the spoils. And I'm not being hyperbolic or misrepresenting anyone. This is literally what meritocrats want. One of the most prominent philosophers to talk about meritocracy historically is John Stuart Mill. And he had this idea called plural voting. So he believed in universal suffrage, which is great, love that. But he also thought that it is reversing all the rules of rational conduct to attempt to raise a political fabric on the supposition that all are equal in worth as human beings. So, how do you square a belief in universal suffrage with a belief that some people are just better than others? Well, as Thomas Mulligan explains,
Mill's proposal is simple. Everybody gets a vote, thereby satisfying universal suffrage, and some people get more than one because they are, in some sense, of greater worth.
Mill was kind enough to provide a breakdown of how many votes each type of person should get, and would you believe it? At the top of the list we have literary men and university graduates. Wild! What a coincidence! But this kind of thinking isn't just ancient history either. There's actually a contemporary philosopher who writes a lot about meritocracy named Jason Brennan, described by Mulligan as the salient exception to philosophers' resistance to restricted suffrage, which is scathing. I love that. And he had some pretty wild ideas.
Brennan argues that citizens have a right not to be subjected to high-stakes decisions made by incompetent and morally unreasonable people, and that this right is violated under universal suffrage. Brennan analogizes electorates to juries. We would think a defendant's rights had been violated if he were convicted by an ignorant, irrational, or morally unreasonable jury. And since real-world electorates are, according to Brennan, ignorant, irrational, and morally unreasonable, those affected by their decisions find their rights violated.
So, this Brennan guy is like your average edgy 14-year-old boy who thinks that you should have to pass an IQ test to vote. And like, yeah, Kyle, we tried that. It's called Jim Crow laws, and they're bad. But don't worry, because Brennan has given us a rundown of how he thinks that voting should work instead.
What ought to count is not voters' expressed preferences, which are affected by ignorance, irrationality, and the other dysfunctions, but their enlightened preferences. If I cast a vote for X rather than Y because I hold false beliefs or am biased, then perhaps my vote should accrue to Y rather than X. For Y is what I would vote for, if not for my ignorance or irrationality. Wild.
In other words, people are too irrational to make choices for themselves, so we need to have a group of designated enlightened voters to make decisions for them. And there are several questions raised by this, like how we would determine who is enlightened, and also how we would determine which vote someone actually would have voted for, if not for their ignorance. But what this ultimately shows is that meritocracy at its core is inherently anti-democratic. The logic of meritocracy leads to the conclusion that some people just are better than other people. Everyone is equal, but some people are more equal than others. And when this kind of thinking is all around us and we start to internalize it, it's not good. Because while the myth of meritocracy comforts us by making us feel like we're in control, it also carries with it a lot of implications that have some pretty nasty side effects, like turning us into assholes. Let me show you what I mean. So one study examined the relationship between meritocratic beliefs and beliefs about income inequality, and found that in societies where economic inequality is rising, so too is a belief in meritocracy.
Citizens in more unequal societies are more likely than those in more egalitarian countries to believe that societal success is reflective of a meritocratic process. And citizens are generally less concerned about economic inequality in countries where popular beliefs attribute inequality to hard work rather than structural forces.
So basically, statistically, if your society has a huge wealth gap, you probably believe in meritocracy. And if your society in general is super pro-meritocracy, then you probably care less about huge wealth gaps. But why? Well, the study argues that people increasingly believe that inequality is the outcome of a fair meritocratic process where societal success simply reflects talent, ambition, and hard work. So it follows then that people who believe inequality reflects hard work are much less concerned about inequality than citizens who see inequality as driven by structural forces such as a person's family wealth and connections. Essentially, if you believe in meritocracy, then that means that your success is something you have control over. Therefore, if anyone is in poverty, that means that they must not have worked hard enough to get out, so it's their own fault that they're poor. And if it's their fault, if it's something that they had the power to change, then why should anyone else care? And the ultra-wealthy making boatloads of money is also totally fine because, hey, they earned that.
Why is it that this era of extraordinary elite generosity, which is real, happens to coincide with an age of extraordinary elite hoarding? The very same class of billionaires and plutocrats who do so much to give and constantly talk about how much they give, have a monopoly on the future in this country.
You're saying the people hoard the money, all right? But now everyone here tries to keep the money that they make. I mean, I think that is like a logical thing that human beings do. You get the money, you keep the money. No one gets the money from like work and then is like, meh. You get what I'm saying? So when you're saying that they're hoarding the money, people would go like, yes, but Anand, that's the American dream. You work hard and then you make your money. Why is that a problem, or why do you think that that is a paradox with the public giving that they're doing?
They're going to fight for their interests.
Okay.
The plutocrats are going to do what's good for plutocrats. You're right. The thing is, this is not feudal England. So we actually have systems that are designed to keep them in check, because you're right. People are going to fight for their own interests.
Right.
And when you have people who have such vast fortunes that they have the power as monopolies to decide which way our elections go, which is a power Mark Zuckerberg frankly has. When you have someone who has the power to dictate whether workers have to pee in a bottle to be able to, survive and make productivity at their company. When you have people with so much power over consumers, you can't just say the hoarding impulse is going to be the hoarding impulse.
There was another study that looked specifically at the way meritocratic beliefs in schools affect how students feel about inequality. And they found that belief in school meritocracy was negatively associated with the perception that income inequality is unfair, and with lower support for redistributive practices. That is, the more they believed in meritocracy, the less they believed that income inequality is unfair or supported policies to address it. Essentially the same conclusion that previous study came to, just with kids this time. But what's super interesting is that these negative associations were stronger for more educated participants than less educated participants, which suggests that the legitimizing effect of belief in school meritocracy is stronger for the winners of this supposed meritocracy. Thus, belief in school meritocracy could serve a twofold legitimizing function. One, justifying the position individuals occupy in the hierarchy, and two, reaffirming the merit of their high status and the privileges associated with that status. In other words, the people who benefit the most from the system are also the most likely to believe that it's fair. It lets the so-called winners explain their success as deserved, and it helps them feel morally justified in keeping the perks that come with it. It's like a virus incentivizing its own perpetuation. And it's bad for us. It's bad for our communities. It turns us into assholes. Or as Sandel puts it,
it has a corrosive effect on the way we interpret our success, or the lack of it. The more we view ourselves as self-made and self-sufficient, the less likely we are to care for the fate of those less fortunate than ourselves. If my success is my own doing, their failure must be their fault. Even as inequality has widened to vast proportions, the public culture has reinforced the notion that we are responsible for our fate and deserve what we get.
None of us care about each other, and it's meritocracy's fault. But, okay, even knowing how terrible meritocracy is, knowing that it's fake, knowing that it hurts everyone, knowing that it perpetuates inequality, there is one final defense to be made. Sure, it sucks, but it works, right? People like to think that meritocracy is efficient, but first of all, efficiency isn't all it's cracked up to be, and if you want to know more about that, then you should watch this video that I made about it. But also, no, meritocracy isn't efficient. Just because someone might have the right credentials on paper doesn't necessarily mean that they'll actually be the best person for the job. For instance, we might not actually want Ivy League educated political leaders. These credentials don't necessarily result in sound public policies and reasoned political discourse. I'm gonna leave this one in. This is fine. Make a choice, on the back or on me. Because, as Sandel goes on to say,
governing well requires practical wisdom and civic virtue, an ability to deliberate about the common good and to pursue it effectively. But neither of these capacities is developed very well in most universities today, even those with the highest reputations. And recent historical experience suggests little correlation between the capacity for political judgment, which involves moral character as well as insight, and the ability to score well on standardized tests and win admission to elite universities. The notion that the best and the brightest are better at governing than their less credentialed fellow citizens is a myth born of meritocratic hubris.
There had to be a better way to do that. You're a little bit stinky. This is something that Bernie Sanders has explicitly called for, by the way. In a recent interview, he explained that maybe what we need right now isn't more out-of-touch, wealthy, perfectly pedigreed politicians. Maybe what we need is blue-collar, normal people representing us. Good people, insightful people, people with good judgment and an understanding of history and political processes, but normal people. The point is, meritocracy doesn't actually get the best people into the positions that need them. This is because A, our methods of measuring merit are flawed and end up just measuring privilege, and B, the people who do have the skills but not the privilege end up just running in place on the economic treadmill, thinking that we can get to the top but just burning ourselves out in the process. And it's not like it's easy to fix this flawed system because its roots are embedded so deep into American history and culture that most of us didn't even stop to question things until a global pandemic happened. Better late than never, I guess. But now we're all starting to see the cracks in the system. We're starting to see that the playing field isn't as level as we've been told. The rules are presented as neutral and fair, but some people are raised with every advantage, given every resource, even coached and tutored to ensure their success. And like with legacy admissions and those personal essays written by application consultants, everyone knows it's happening, but no one steps in to stop it because it helps keep the system looking fair. Those without the same advantages are told that everyone is given the same chance and anyone can win. And the few who do make it out on top are held up as proof that the system works. And while they reap the rewards, their stories get turned into something the rest of us are meant to aspire to. They become the exception that keeps the rule intact. And the people who benefit the most from all this, they're the ones born so far ahead that they never even have to enter the competition. They don't worry about test scores or application deadlines. The outcomes were never uncertain for them. From where they sit outside of it all, it doesn't even feel like a game. Because when you can't lose, the odds are always in your favor. Wait, this sounds familiar. I loved The Hunger Games as a kid. And to be fair, I was exactly the target audience, a 12-year-old girl from Appalachia who devoured dystopian stories. I've read the series a couple of times, but haven't touched them in probably a decade. But as I was working on this video, I kept making connections between the meritocracy stuff and the Hunger Games. Because when you start to compare our meritocratic society to the world of Panem, there are a lot of similarities. So for those of you who didn't obsess over these books like I did, The Hunger Games takes place in the country of Panem, which is a dystopian version of North America, ruled by a wealthy capital that controls 12 districts. Every year, as punishment for a past uprising, the capital forces each district to send one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 to compete in a televised fight to the death. The selection process is called the reaping, and every eligible child's name goes into the pool once per eligible year, but families living in poverty can put their child's name in multiple times to receive extra food rations called tesserae. Once the children are selected as tributes, they're taken to the capital, given makeovers, and paraded through interviews like reality TV contestants.
I'll tell you what, Peter. You go out there and you win this thing. And when you get home, she'll have to go out with you. Right, folks?
Their performance in pre-games training is ranked, and their personalities are carefully managed to appeal to an audience because, once the games begin, survival isn't just about skill, it's about who can get sponsors. Wealthy capital citizens can send tributes gifts during the game, like food, medicine, and weapons, if they find them appealing or entertaining enough. It's a fight to the death, yeah, but it's also a popularity contest.
Come on. Come on.
Then, the single winner is rewarded with a life of luxury, a new home in the victor's village, a lifetime supply of food, and renown across Panem. The victor is also sent on a PR tour to each of the districts to celebrate their win, and every year after that, they're required to mentor the next set of tributes from their district. But in return, the capital is able to use them as proof that the system works, that anyone can win and live a luxurious life if they just try hard enough. Suzanne Collins has hinted that she's a little bit frustrated with how her books have been interpreted, especially by Hollywood. While the novels are a critique of wealth disparity, media manipulation, and state violence, much of the marketing around the films focused on the love triangle between the main characters. The wild fashion of the capital was also treated more like inspiration than satire. Instead of interrogating why the citizens of the capital obsess over beauty while children die on their screens, audiences were sold capital-themed makeup lines and runway collections.
Everyone is really excited about the Hunger Games Catching Fire movie, but beauty reporter Kirby Johnson is even more excited about the new collection that is coming out inspired by the book and the movie.
Yes.
Big day for you.
Oh, I am so excited about this. So CoverGirl is collaborating with the Hunger Games on a new limited edition makeup collection ranging from nail polishes to lip glosses to nail art. What more could I ask for?
You couldn't ask for more.
I actually still have the lipstick that I bought from the Capitol collection, because again, I was a teenager. And it's this purple that I have. It's, decade-old makeup, so if I die, that's why. But it's important not to miss those deeper meanings, because Panem feels eerily familiar. Like, the Hunger Games has its own version of legacy admissions and standardized test prep. So on paper, the games are supposed to be fair. Every tribute enters the arena with an equal chance to win. But in the wealthier capital-aligned districts, children are actually trained for the games, groomed from a young age to be winners. They're actually called careers because entering the games is like a job that they've trained for. Technically, that kind of preparation is illegal, but when the rule breaking comes from the districts that the capital favors, no one intervenes. And that's not so different from the real world, where wealthier kids are enrolled in top-tier schools, given access to private tutors, taught how to interview, how to network, and sure, they might not always win, even their rule bending and loophole finding gets punished sometimes, like all those college admission scandals from a few years ago, but they have been given the right set of starting conditions, and so they have much better chances of winning. And in the Hunger Games, not only do the poor families not have those chances, but they're actively disadvantaged too because of the tesserae system. If your family is starving, you can take extra food in exchange for extra entries, and so the poorest kids end up having their names in the bowl dozens of times. And it's the same here, where opportunity is technically open to everyone, but poverty doesn't just mean fewer chances to succeed, it also means a higher risk of failure. Poor families are more likely to be saddled with student debt just for trying to get an education, and they're more likely to take out predatory payday loans when emergencies hit, trapping them in an endless cycle of repayment. They're more likely to face evictions, medical bankruptcies, and skyrocketing interest rates. It's expensive to be poor. Just like in Pan Am, the people with the least are forced to gamble the most in a game where the deck is stacked against them. And both in the games and in real life, these disadvantages compound on one another. It's not a coincidence that one of the most impactful deaths in the entire trilogy is that of Rue, the young black girl from District 11. Because Suzanne Collins is a competent writer, I don't think that it's a stretch to say that her choice to make Rue black was an acknowledgement that in these already brutal systems, marginalized people are usually the ones to receive the brunt of that brutality. I also think that in a post-George Floyd protests world, it's actually really astute that Pan Am's revolution is, for all intents and purposes, started by Rue's death. In the games, survival depends not just on skill, but on public appeal. If they can get sponsors to like them, they might be gifted food, medicine, or weapons, but only if they're compelling enough. And that's not far off from our own reality TV-ified meritocracy, where students polish their personal narratives for scholarship committees, and workers are told to build a personal brand. You have to turn yourself into a product. It's like Survivor, but instead of playing for $1 million, you're playing for the ability to pay rent or access to healthcare. And if you do get lucky and win, you don't get freedom from the system. You become a part of the system that keeps the cycle going. In the Hunger Games, victors are paraded around the districts as proof that the system works. Look, the Capitol says, anyone can win. But most tributes don't survive. 96% of the kids necessarily have to die based on the rules of the game. And the ones who lived are turned into symbols, used to legitimate the very system that literally tried to kill them. Just like we hold up the few poor kids who make it to Harvard as proof that success is just a matter of odds, effort, and individual excellence. But it's not. As one character says in the Hunger Games prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping,
that phrase, "may the odds be ever in your favor," has caught on as a way to wish someone good luck. But if you think about it, it's a sadistic thing to say to a tribute, given that survival's an impossibility for 23 of the 24 kids.
Also, if you want more of this, I really highly recommend the book Stay Alive: Surviving Capitalism's Coming Hunger Games by Michael Harris. It's a quick and easy read, and it has a lot of good nuggets, so I definitely recommend checking it out if you want to really get into the weeds on this topic. The most important element of this comparison, though, is that it illuminates the biggest flaw in how we all think about meritocracy. Because for a lot of us, we know that meritocracy isn't real. The current system isn't actually living up to its meritocratic promise, but we want it to, right? We want a meritocracy, just one that works for us rather than against us. We want to take our broken meritocracy and fix it. We want to keep the system in place. All we're asking for is a level playing field, right? We still want people to compete, we just want the competition to be fair. So we talk about banning legacy admissions and capping application fees so more students can afford to apply to the best schools. We fund leadership camps for low-income students to help them catch up before college. Colleges start offering test-optional admissions and highlight their most diverse class ever and recruit from a slightly wider pool of zip codes. Companies introduce diversity hiring targets and host panels about equity in the workplace. We roll out college readiness programs in high-poverty schools and put up motivational posters about grit and growth mindset, because we still want winners. We just want to make sure that those winners really deserve to win. But imagine if we asked for a level playing field in the Hunger Games. If we said we still want a victor, we just want to make sure that every child has a fair shot to win. We'd talk about banning career district training programs, standardizing the reaping process, and limiting tesserae so that kids from poor districts aren't forced to enter their names more times just to survive. We'd offer extra training to the outer district tributes to help them catch up with the careers, and we'd create pipelines to help high potential tributes get noticed by capital audiences. The game makers could swap arena layouts that could advantage one tribute over another for a more neutral terrain, and there would be standard equipment drops and more equitable sponsorship distribution. Because we want there to be a victor. We just want to make sure that every child has the same chance to win. If every tribute went in on equal footing, then the games would be fair. But even in a fair Hunger Games, children would still die. We'd just give some of them a better chance not to. And I don't know about you, but I think that's unacceptable. So why is it acceptable to do the same thing in real life?
Even if a strictly merit-based system were possible, what is less often acknowledged by either the left or the right is that such a social system, although fair by strictly meritocratic standards, would be neither humane nor desirable. Its strict application would likely be quite brutal.
Quite brutal indeed. It actually reminds me of that one meme with the boxes. You know the one. I've seen several different versions of it, but this one is my favorite. Because finding different ways to get around a problem doesn't actually address the problem itself. Even if we give a boost to the people who need it, that doesn't solve the reason why they need a boost in the first place. The only issue that I have with this version of the meme in particular is that there's no fence, which I don't think is safe. I think that a better option would be something like a chain link fence, so something that attendees can see through with no more need for boxes, but which still makes sure that no one's going to get a foul ball to the face. But in any case, the meme itself shows why just making a terrible system more fair isn't actually a sustainable solution. Sure, it's a good band-aid, but it doesn't actually address the root of the problem. And this is actually one of the reasons why some people on the left are skeptical of DEI initiatives. So part of the reason why some of these initiatives are problematic is because they perpetuate what Joe Littler calls neoliberal justice narratives. Essentially, she argues, things like feminism and anti-racism have become co-opted by the market, which acknowledges systemic barriers, but offers neoliberal capitalism fueled by individualism and consumption as the cure. It tells marginalized people, yeah, there are systemic forces acting against you, but then tells them that the solution to that is just to climb harder up the ladder.
Neoliberal justice narratives recognize existing unjust social dynamics in relation to ethnicity, gender, and class, and suggest that neoliberal marketization will solve these problems to produce greater meritocracy.
And what this produces is meritocracy rebranded as justice. Still competitive, still individualistic, just with a more diverse set of winners. It's the coding bootcamp for low-income kids that says a job in tech is their way out of poverty, rather than a solution that tackles the causes of poverty in the first place. It's a corporate panel on women in leadership, held in a workplace with no paid maternity leave. It's more female drone pilots. I don't know where the claps are supposed to go, is the thing. I've never done that in real life, so I don't really know, like, someone explain to me, like, the syntax of how that should work. Now, that's not to say that things like DEI and affirmative action and other band-aid policies are necessarily bad. It's probably good to do something rather than nothing at all, and we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Several of the writers who critique these surface-level solutions do also acknowledge that they're probably better than nothing. Sandel says equality of opportunity is a morally necessary corrective to injustice, but it's a remedial principle and not an adequate ideal. And Littler, in her book, quotes Gary Young, who said, "I'm not in favor of quotas in general. They are a blunt instrument. But I'm even less in favor of getting nothing done, and I prefer blunt instruments to no tools at all." These tools exist to chip away at the bigger problem, and that's good. The problem is that it's really easy to stop at those blunt instruments, to act as if they've solved the problem when all they've really done is make a deeply unequal system look a little more fair around the edges. Like, sure, reducing reliance on the SAT would make the system less unfair, says Sandel, but it wouldn't challenge the notion of higher education as a sorting project whose role is to seek out talent and allocate opportunity and rewards to those who possess it. But the sorting project is the problem. Making it more truly meritocratic entrenches it more deeply. Blunt instruments can't reach those more deeply entrenched issues. They can only chip away at the edges. But the unfairness isn't just at the edges, it goes all the way through. Meritocracy is inherently unfair. There is no way to have a true meritocracy and also have a truly equal society.
Suppose we could fulfill the promise of giving every child an equal chance to compete for success in school, in the workplace, and in life. Would this make for a just society? It is tempting to say, yes, of course, isn't that what the American dream is all about? Creating an open, mobile society in which the child of a farm worker or a penniless immigrant can rise to become a CEO? Despite its powerful appeal, however, there is reason to doubt that even a perfectly realized meritocracy would be a just society. Because the meritocratic ideal is about mobility, not equality. It does not say that there is anything wrong with yawning gaps between rich and poor. It only insists that the children of the rich and the children of the poor should be able, over time, to swap places based on their merits. What matters for a meritocracy is that everyone has an equal chance to climb the ladder of success. It has nothing to say about how far apart the rungs on the ladder should be. The meritocratic ideal is not a remedy for inequality. It is a justification of inequality.
So the question becomes, how do we get rid of that sorting project? How do we treat the disease rather than the symptoms? What does a true solution, one that actually is a remedy for inequality, even look like? And how do we find something that people could actually get on board with? Because even if meritocracy isn't perfect, it's intuitive, it feels natural, it's comfortable. And so trying to imagine an alternative is hard and uncomfortable. But there are alternatives. And I want you to bear with me. I know that this has been a long video, but if you're still here, first of all, make sure that you like and subscribe if you want to see more of what I make. But also, if you're still here, then that probably means that you're at least willing to acknowledge that things are kind of bad. So just hear me out as I talk about the ways we can make things better. If we really want to change things, we have to start by questioning the promises of meritocracy that we've been sold. Throughout this video, we've seen how those promises fall apart. We've seen how merit often reflects wealth and privilege more than talent or effort, and how believing in meritocracy makes failure feel like a personal shame instead of the result of structural barriers. And even when meritocracy works, the handful of people who make it to the top are used as proof that the system is fair, all while the system keeps doing harm to those who need the most help. It's tempting to think that the solution is to just fix meritocracy, to make the competition more fair. But this doesn't get to the root of the problem. Think about how we talk about meritocracy. We talk about leveling the playing field and climbing the ladder to success, but we never actually stop to think through the implications of that language. Leveling the playing field implies we're playing a game with winners and losers. When you climb a ladder, you have to climb over others to get to the top. The language of meritocracy is filled with metaphors that frame success as something scarce that we all have to compete for. But the problem isn't that not enough people can climb the ladder at once. It's that the ladder itself implies a competitive, linear, hierarchical system in which, by definition, certain people must be left behind. The top cannot exist without the bottom. Not everyone can rise. I actually had to try really hard not to make a joke in the script about a top not existing without a bottom, but I don't think that I'm queer enough to make that joke. So if I can have some people in the comments make that joke for me, please. Even a perfect meritocracy would still be built on competition. But what if instead of asking how to make the competition more fair, we asked whether competition is even the best way to solve problems in the first place? Because competition might feel natural, but it's only one way of structuring things. Alternatives are possible. Like, look at workplaces. Right now, survival depends on competition no matter what kind of work you do. If you're in retail or food service, you're competing for hours. If you're in an office, then you're competing for promotions. Even in the creator economy, we're competing for views and brand deals. No matter what kind of work you do, you have to be better, or at least look better, than the people next to you. But it doesn't have to be like this. In democratized workplaces, employees share ownership and decision-making. They have agency over their work, and profits are divided more equitably. In worker co-ops, workers collectively own the business, vote on business decisions, and share the profits that their work creates. And I talked about this in my grading video too, but in jobs where workers are given more independence and control over their work, they aren't just happier, they're also more productive too. So it's a win all around. Co-ops aren't perfect, sure, but they at least challenge the idea that competition is inevitable. Another area where people are trying alternatives to competition is in education. College admissions have become one of the most high-stakes, high-pressure competitions in American life. But one alternative idea is, to paraphrase Sandel's position, what if we just let people into Harvard at random?
Rather than engage in the exceedingly difficult and uncertain task of trying to predict who among them are the most surpassingly meritorious, choose the entering class by lottery. In other words, toss the folders of the qualified applicants down the stairs, pick up 2,000 of them, and leave it at that. This proposal does not ignore merit altogether, only those qualified are admitted, but it treats merit as a threshold qualification, not an ideal to be maximized.
He argues that this is useful because honestly, it's really hard to figure out who has the most merit, even after getting to know someone, let alone just from a resume and personal statement. It's also a positive alternative because it would restore some sanity to the high school years, and relieve, at least to some extent, the soul-killing, resume-stuffing, perfection-seeking experience they've become. And because it would highlight the role that luck plays in success, helping to subdue some of that meritocratic hubris that he talks about. And just to be clear, the point isn't to abandon academic standards altogether. It's to recognize that beyond a basic threshold, the differences between applicants are honestly basically arbitrary at some point, and pretending otherwise just fuels an academic and extracurricular arms race ending in mutually assured burnout. Now, I think that this idea is super interesting, and I'm actually really interested in what you all think about it, so leave a comment telling me your ideas for how we could fix higher ed, and honestly, the more wild, the better. But like I said, these ideas aren't wild fantasies. Worker co-ops and lottery admissions exist right now. They're not perfect, and they're not a magic fix, but they do show that we don't have to accept the current system as our only option. So, what are we waiting for? Well, anytime that you start talking about alternatives to meritocracy, certain objections pop up almost immediately. And it makes sense, right? Like, we've spent our whole lives being taught that competition is what makes people work hard and inequality is just natural. So when you suggest that maybe we don't have to organize society around those ideas, it feels unrealistic at best and dangerous at worst. People think that without meritocracy, everything would collapse. Right now, the biggest fear is about standards. Without meritocracy, we'll just end up handing out Ivy League admission or high-skill, well-paid jobs to people who aren't qualified, all in the name of fairness or DEI, right? But this highlights an assumption that a lot of people make about our current system, that merit does actually currently maintain high standards. But it doesn't. Right now, merit is usually defined by test scores, elite credentials, and polished resumes. Metrics that, as I have explained throughout this video, are shaped by access to wealth and resources, not necessarily the ability to do a job well. A more expansive idea of qualifications doesn't mean throwing standards out. It means making sure that we're actually measuring the skills and abilities that we claim to care about. But it's hard for a lot of people to imagine schools with broader admission standards still being good. We sort of equate exclusivity with quality. If something is broadly accessible, it must somehow be worse or less rigorous. But exclusivity isn't necessarily a marker of quality. If you've ever met someone who went to an Ivy League, you can probably vouch for this. They're not all infinitely smarter than the rest of us. They've just had a lot of opportunities that many other equally smart kids didn't have. But this is where our current meritocratic panic gets it wrong. The goal isn't to lower standards, it's to stop pretending that the old standards were ever really about excellence in the first place. We're not talking about letting people into med school who don't know basic biology, just making sure that admissions actually line up with the skills that matter. Can you think critically and not just memorize facts? Can you build an argument? Can you work through complex problems that don't have a clear right answer? Instead of only valuing a perfect SAT score, which mostly just tells you that someone had access to expensive prep courses, we could value things like community leadership, multilingual fluency, innovative thinking, creative problem solving under pressure. You know, actual skills that doctors need, not just the ability to jump through expensive hoops. But there's another fear over getting rid of meritocracy. If we help people, whether it's through mutual aid or by expanding standards for certain positions, then people will just stop trying altogether. Without the fear of poverty hanging over them, nobody would work hard, right? Well, there are a lot of things wrong with this, but number one, it's a myth. It is just not true. This is something that I actually covered extensively in my grading video, but the gist is this. People genuinely like doing things. Like, think about it. If we didn't enjoy putting effort into stuff, hobbies wouldn't exist. People wouldn't bake elaborate cakes on weekends or write thousands of words of fan fiction or spend hours volunteering at animal shelters without expecting a paycheck. We don't need the constant threat of starvation or homelessness to motivate us to do things. We often just do the jobs we have to do because we're afraid of not having enough money to survive. But if our basic needs like housing, healthcare, and education were universally guaranteed, we'd be free from having to do things just to survive and actually be able to do the work that genuinely inspires and fulfills us. In other countries where universal needs are guaranteed, people are happier and healthier, and they still get things done. It's not like when you stop tying healthcare to employment, everyone suddenly stops working. If anything, people are more likely to take risks and start businesses or pursue meaningful work when they're not terrified that one mistake will ruin them. And it's also worth pointing out how unevenly we apply this fear. People are constantly worried that poor people will freeload off of public services. But if you're mad about your tax dollars going towards something that you don't personally see as contributing to society, I have some bad cats. Is what I have. People are constantly worried that poor people will freeload off of public services. But if you are mad about your tax dollars going towards something that you don't personally see as contributing to society, I have some bad news for you about how taxes work in the United States. You are currently subsidizing the lifestyles of billionaires, whether you realize it or not. There's already freeloading happening. It's just happening at the top. Our system is full of people gaming it, whether it's in college admissions scandals or tax evasion or corporate bailouts. We just don't call it freeloading, we call it business savvy.
Today, the Obama administration did indeed extend them an olive branch.
It looks like the country's financial giants may have turned a corner.
The president's message to them.
The bankers who left the meeting had already received more than $180 billion from the federal government, with almost no conditions.
No strings attached. I mean, everybody else, homeowners, everybody else who's trying to get a loan, everybody on Main Street, small businesses, not only are they not able to get loans, but if they get anything, there are huge strings attached. How, in good conscience, in good faith, can we not ask the banks, demand from the banks, some conditions upon getting bailed out?
So the question isn't whether people will sometimes try to game the system. They will. The question is why you care more about the system being gamed than you do about people going hungry. Human dignity shouldn't have to depend upon constant economic contribution. Everyone deserves a baseline of dignity and security, regardless of how they choose to spend their time. To quote British economic historian R.H. Tawney,
individual happiness does not only require that people should be free to rise to new positions of comfort and distinction, it also requires that they should be able to lead a life of dignity and culture, whether they rise or not.
But there's a genuine fear in our culture of people getting things that they don't deserve or not getting things that they do. And I think a lot of those fears come from our obsession with hierarchies, with knowing who's on top and who's on bottom. And I get it, hierarchies are comfy. They work as heuristics to help us know how well educated someone is, or how difficult their job is, or how valuable their work is to the world. But these heuristics aren't always accurate and are honestly pretty arbitrary. We've all agreed that certain skills or positions deserve more recognition and reward than others, but should they? CEOs have more power in society than line cooks do, and we justify this by saying that CEOs deserve more because they work harder. But do they? They're not on their feet all day. They're not surrounded by dangerous hot appliances. They're not working in loud, crowded, fast-paced workspaces. Investment bankers make more money than auto mechanics, and we justify this by saying that investment bankers require more specialized knowledge. But do they? They don't have to diagnose complex engine failures or master constantly evolving automotive computer systems or navigate precise mechanical specifications or spend years training on detailed technical manuals just to keep vehicles safe and functional. We reward work that's economically productive, but then dismiss work that entails caregiving, service, or art, despite those things being pretty important for everyone. Why should hedge fund managers be making millions just moving people's money around when teachers often have to take on a second job just to make ends meet? We're conditioned to accept that some people deserve more resources, respect, and comfort than others. But in order to imagine a world without meritocracy, we need to imagine a world where everyone deserves to live a life of dignity, regardless of their career or level of education. As Martin Luther King Jr. put it,
"One day our society will come to respect the sanitation workers if it is to survive. For the person who picks up our garbage is the final analysis as significant as the physician. For if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity."
And just to be clear, I am not saying that we should pay everyone the same exact salary and make everyone live in the same exact house and that we should never reward anyone for anything. The issue isn't that meritocracy rewards effort, it's that the rewards it gives aren't based on actual social value and are drastically uneven. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like every person's contribution to society is identical. Some work does require more skill and responsibility, and rewarding people for their hard work and effort and training is good, just not if it means that they make millions while other people are living in poverty or without basic human rights. We can recognize real differences in effort, talent, and contribution without pretending that these differences justify giving one person healthcare while another can't afford insulin, or saying that one person deserves housing and another deserves to sleep on park benches every night. It's not about making everyone the same, it's about making sure that no one's basic survival depends on them winning a rigged game. That's the real alternative. Not a world where nobody succeeds or effort doesn't matter, but a world where dignity isn't something you have to earn. If we want to move beyond meritocracy, we have to start thinking seriously about what it would actually take to build something better. And to be honest, that's harder than it sounds, and it already sounds pretty hard. Meritocratic thinking shows up everywhere, in how we hire, how we educate, how we talk about success and failure. It shapes the way we see ourselves and the way we see other people. So if we want to change things, it's going to take some work. The first step is to, as Joe Littler puts it, name neoliberal meritocracy as a problem and talk more loudly about how it functions as a fig leaf for inequality. Meritocratic assumptions are baked into every facet of our lives, so we all have tons of opportunities to talk about it. In everyday conversations, we can work to challenge and shift cultural assumptions about meritocracy. You can explain how much of success just comes down to sheer luck, or use the points that I've brought up in this video to help others start to question what merit even means. Like when your uncle complains about lowering standards, you can ask, yeah, but what were those old standards actually measuring anyway? Or when your in-laws talk about how great it would be to bring back merit pay for teachers, you can ask how merit would even be measured and whether it would even actually benefit the students who need the most help. And I know that talking doesn't sound like much, but genuinely, it does more than you think. Studies have shown that when people believe their conditions are inevitable or inescapable, or that the systems they're living under are traditional and long-standing rather than fairly recent in history, they're willing to put up with their own subjugation, because there's nothing they can do about it, right? This is just the way things are. So we need to talk to our neighbors and help them see that our system isn't inevitable or inescapable. Another study found that people are unable to see the full extent of inequality in their society because the lives of the rich and poor are increasingly divided between separate institutions, which mean that one's chances of getting to know someone from a different socioeconomic background, let alone developing an understanding of another person's privilege or plight, are slim. But this means that we need to make it easier for people from wildly different backgrounds to see each other and talk to each other, something that can really only be accomplished through policies that promote equitable resource distribution, like progressive taxation, reinvestment in community infrastructure, and robust public funding for education, healthcare, and housing. These policies will help the wealthy acknowledge that their individual success relies heavily on collective resources and community support, and it will start to close the wealth gap. And when people from different socioeconomic statuses start to get closer, they start to see each other not as winners and losers, but as all part of the same community who can work together to make everyone's lives better. Now, you can help with this by voting, obviously, but also by showing up to town halls to advocate for expanded public services. You can also start supporting workplace democracy, backing union drives, and voting for stronger labor protections. If you have the means to do so, you could even try starting a co-op yourself. And if you can't do any of that, you can simply support a coworker's efforts to make your workplace fairer, even if it doesn't immediately benefit you. Mutual aid is also a really easy first step. So mutual aid is essentially community members directly helping each other out, based on the idea that everyone has something to contribute and everyone needs help sometimes. It can be as simple as donating to someone's GoFundMe, or as robust as neighbors pooling resources for a community bail fund or to help cover someone's rent. The point is that it's flexible and local. Just setting aside some money for a neighbor or volunteering to pick up someone's groceries for them can do so much for someone who's struggling. And even more than that, it helps to build a support system in a community where people can help each other without demanding proof they deserve it. Building webs of support where survival isn't conditional is one of the most immediate ways that we can push back against meritocratic logic. And that, honestly, is the template for the whole new vision of a world without meritocracy. A world built on collaboration and mutual support. We can build a better society. But that requires that we start seeing ourselves as interconnected, responsible not just for our own success, but for the health and prosperity of each other. It requires that we acknowledge how every single one of us contributes to the overall well-being of society. We have to, as Sandel argues,
contend with the moral questions about what kinds of work are worthy of recognition and esteem, and what we owe one another as citizens. These questions are connected. For we cannot determine what counts as a contribution worth affirming without reasoning together about the purposes and ends of the common life we share. And we cannot deliberate about common purposes and ends without a sense of belonging, without seeing ourselves as members of a community to which we are indebted. Only insofar as we depend on others and recognize our dependence do we have reason to appreciate their contributions to our collective well-being. This requires a sense of community sufficiently robust to enable citizens to say and to believe that we are all in this together, not as a ritual incantation in times of crisis, but as a plausible description of our everyday lives. Over the past 4 decades, market-driven globalization and the meritocratic conception of success have made us less reliant on our fellow citizens, less grateful for the work they do, and less open to the claims of solidarity. Meritocratic sorting taught us that our success is our own doing, and so eroded our sense of indebtedness. We are now in the midst of the angry whirlwind this unraveling has produced. To renew the dignity of work, we must repair the social bonds the age of merit has undone.
Repairing these social bonds involves recognizing our mutual dependence and acknowledging that no one succeeds in isolation. It means ensuring that resources like healthcare, education, and housing are accessible to everyone so that everyone has opportunities to thrive. It also involves creating policies and systems that fairly share the collective wealth generated by our communal efforts, which would not only address immediate inequalities, but also strengthen our society as a whole by ensuring stability and dignity for every single person. And yes, it means being willing to talk about limits on extreme wealth, limits on hoarded power, limits on the idea that dignity should only belong to the winners. We need to take the power away from the 1% and give it to the 99%, in Joe Littler's words. And if you're worried because that sounds like socialism, I've got some bad news for you on that one, bud. Remember, the word meritocracy was literally coined by a socialist writing in a socialist magazine, giving a name to the thing that would ruin society. And I know that that might sound scary, but remember, it's not punishing people for their success, it's reminding them that success doesn't happen in a vacuum. Success relies on things that most of us don't even think about day to day. Clean water systems, public education, safe roads, reliable electricity, functioning hospitals, stable internet infrastructure. None of us built those things alone, and more importantly, none of us could. Even the scrappiest startup or the hardest working student is standing on centuries worth of layers of collective investment that made their work possible. This kind of change will take a concerted effort from the difficult and much constrained work of organization and mobilization, as one paper phrased it. So don't get discouraged if it takes a while. No one changes their mind immediately, and people very rarely change their minds in front of others. Yet, history consistently shows that meaningful social progress is achievable through persistent advocacy, community engagement, and thoughtful policymaking. Dismantling meritocracy is going to require us to have the courage to question norms, confront our own discomfort, and advocate for structural change. But a fairer, more equitable society isn't just possible, it's necessary, because meritocracy is killing us. By working together, we can build a future where everyone thrives, where every individual is inherently valued and respected. It is possible. There is a future free from the Hunger Games. We're not stuck living in this meritocratic myth. We just have to be brave enough to see that for ourselves. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of the video. I know that this was a long one, so genuinely, thank you for sticking with me. I hope that you enjoyed it. It was quite a labor of love, so I hope that you liked it. And if you did, then make sure to like and subscribe and do, all the YouTube things. You know what to do, you've been here before. But YouTube is not a meritocracy, so if you want to help this video get seen by more people, then the best thing that you can do is actually to share this video with your friends or your enemies, honestly. Like, maybe that's like a power move, to share it with your enemies, so do it. Assert your dominance. But really quick, I do want to mention that I have a ton of sources in the description about meritocracy and related subjects that I didn't actually quote in the video itself. There's a video from Overzealots, who's a creator whose stuff I'm really loving right now, and his video on neoliberalism actually touches on how meritocracy as a framework is used by both Republicans and Democrats, and it is definitely worth watching. I also have a link for Stimpunks, which is an organization made by and for disabled and neurodivergent people, and they have a whole page just full of resources about meritocracy and debunking meritocratic myths. And honestly, just their whole site is filled with resources on a whole bunch of things. I definitely recommend checking them out. They are an incredible organization doing incredible stuff. Also, the Joe Littler book that I quoted throughout this whole video is actually available online for free, legally. I have a link in the description where you can get a PDF of her book if you want to read it, because she made it open access because she wanted people to read it. So if you want to read it, go read it. I think that's it. So with that out of the way, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons whose names are probably scrolling by over here. I assume, with an especially big thanks to Megan Lowndes, Chef Alderson, Hugh Sophia, and Justin Lowry. You are all the absolute best, and genuinely this video would not have been possible without all of my patrons, because with how long it took, I went a long time without making other videos, and my ad revenue reflected that. So thank you to my patrons for making it possible for me to continue feeding my cats, even if they won't sit on my lap. Patrons get early and ad-free access to my videos, as well as having a chance to get one of my end of video poems dedicated to them. So if that sounds like stuff that you would like, then head on over to patreon.com/Zoe_B, which I also have linked in the description. There's links all over the place. Just, you know where the links are. Go look at the links. I don't know why I'm being so like combative. But speaking of end of video poems, it is that time. So without further ado, for Kai, here are 3 haiku on loss. Mockingbirds forget many once familiar calls. The woods are shrinking. A young 5-lined skink gives up its tail to a fox. To lose is to live. The squirrel has gone, abandoning its acorn. The oak tree takes root. And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon. I hope. Bye, folks. See, now this is what the people want. This is what the people want. Oh my goodness. Oh, you're so sweet. Look at this just like absolute baby. He is just a little tiny baby child. Just a tiny baby child. Oh. Does this look like a Renaissance painting? Make fan art, I guess. Make a Renaissance painting. Yeah, it's the woman with the like ferret, like, or like a mink, some kind of like long creature. This could be like Mary holding Jesus with the way that he's looking at me, but that seems a little sacrilegious. So,